Welcome to the Mapper Forward podcast, friends. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Darrin Daniel from Cup of Excellence to the podcast. Hey, Darrin, how are you doing?
Great. How are you?
I am good. How have you found this time of all the weirdness and pandemic and protests and lots of changes in 2020?
Oh, it has been an unbelievable year, and it's impacted the organization in a really big way. Everybody's been impacted, but we had to kind of resurrect a whole new system, and so we've been very busy just trying to recalculate how we do what we do for the competitions and auctions and reaching out to the members and reaching out to growers to find out, how are they doing? How are they, getting through this? And the first month, I'd say the March to April felt like a year. I think everybody's expressed that whole time warp thing that's been happening.
Oh, yeah.
And with the recent protests and the realization of how bad things are in the divided America, it's just really exposed, kind of the difficulties that we're going through. And there's a bit of inspiration for sure in terms of dealing with the pandemic and then having this kind of, I'd say a social revolution, global social revolution that's
a
happening.
great word, yeah.
Yeah. And
It's hard to believe that you were on the podcast just 6 months ago. You were our first guest for 2020.
Wow.
And that was only 6 months ago.
Gosh, that just feels like a whole other time.
It really does. I've been watching what Cup of Excellence has been doing to adapt to all the changing that's been going on. And so I'd love to have a conversation with you about what that's like as the executive director. Oh no, did your coffee just run out?
Bit of Ethiopian natural that I just finished.
Oh no.
I'm okay. I'll survive.
Great. Excuse me. As the executive director of Cup of Excellence, and for anyone that's listening that hasn't listened to the first episode of this year where Darrin came on the podcast for the first time, it's a great conversation and you get a real insight into what Cup of Excellence is about. And I would recommend you listening to it. So it's like a buddy comparison to this conversation, because now we're going to discuss Cup of Excellence and a couple of other core things that I'd really love to touch on in a whole different era of the world, not just the coffee value chain. And in comparison, the two conversations are going to be really interesting to put side by side and listen to. So I encourage people to listen to that. But it's been really fun, Darrin, to watch and really interesting to watch Cup of Excellence adapt to a pandemic and to adapt to making, the best way to say this, as you enter into what's happening with the way that the world is shifting from a revolutionary perspective, it's interesting to see that the way that Cup of Excellence have approached 2020 and the shifting that's happened is to say that we have to show up for what we stand for, even though things are shifting.
Mm-hmm.
Which I got to tell you has been really inspirational for me as someone who had a great conversation with you and sees you as a progressive leader and sees you as somebody who is standing by what the values of the business that you're a part of running are all about. Seeing you stand by that and not disappointing people who are observing the brand and supporting the brand, to see you not buckle at that and say, well, it's all just too fucking hard, so we just have to cancel Cup of Excellence. What was that like for you as a leader?
Well, the first thing that we did was to reach out to many members and core members and former board members and just get some advice on what we think that should happen. And there were some people that just said, it's just maybe not in good taste to continue, and maybe it's best that you just shut down for the year and start working on 2021. We did get some comments like that, which surprised me a little bit, but mostly the guidance that we received was, find a way to do it. And then when we reached out to our partners in the producing countries, we obviously had some countries that had more severe situations, like Honduras and Mexico, and they just weren't financially or politically able to do the program, and so they took the decision to cancel. But we gave them every opportunity, and we started creating new protocols and new phytosanitary ways to cup without potentially infecting anyone, and we put all of that out very quickly, and in those countries just really unfortunately just weren't able to do it. But the other countries remained vigilant, and that inspired us to kind of keep going. So if it's always been the case that if a producing country doesn't have their heart in it and they really don't really support COE, it just won't work. There has to be a level of passion and commitment, because it's a tough program to implement. It's not it's not cheap, but the impact is really strong, and all of the countries know that. But I think for me personally, the first few weeks of trying to redirect and pivot, everybody's using that phrase, but it really was, and it felt like we had a lot of internal talks where I feel like we're going to do all this work and somehow it's going to not be possible, and we had to kind of keep forgetting that. Just don't think about the fact that something could get even worse than where we're at right now.
Which
and
did.
And especially, it did. And especially, being an American and having the worst management possible to cope with this virus, the worst leadership. I mean, to be living in a time where we have the very worst leadership, and then to try to figure out a way to lead an organization within the structure of what's going on here, it was kind of, I can't imagine what it would have been like not to have done it. I would have been a different person. And we would be a different organization if we chose not to do it. So I think a lot of us felt really inspired. And now that we have Ethiopia, the first one of the year next week, the auction, we just had a meeting this morning with our team on the ground there. And, people are in tears about just getting to this far. Like they can't, we're just kind of fielding a lot of really great comments and support from all sides, that we were able to pull it off. And so that keeps you, motivated. And, but the one word that kept coming up during the whole process was, we're just innovating things that we didn't think we needed to even worry about, or that, we always do it this way. Well, the fact that we always had to have the jury had to be in, Guatemala. It had to be the international phase jury has to be there. And the bonding of a jury, the group think of a jury being together in the same room, sharing comments about coffee and experiencing it together. That's just so baked into our program. And yet we were like, scrap that. Let's figure out some other way. And now we're realizing that, if things go back to normal, we will go back to that in-country experience. But we're thinking now that maybe we would globalize a global jury that's outside of the country, that's experiencing the coffees at the same time or close to the same time, so that we have a much larger jury, more data, more buy-in, more people that maybe their countries won't allow them to travel to Honduras, or maybe not let them travel to Ethiopia. Now they can still have that experience. So we're really like, oh, wait a minute, we can have these. We call them global coffee centers. They're GCCs, and now we have 5 of them around the world, and we have people writing us saying, how can I become a GCC?
Yeah, wow.
So we're like, oh, we didn't even, and even to the extent where now we're looking at maybe these authorized centers could act as arbiters of quality outside of COE, that they would be authorized by COE to, have a lab that's approved, so to speak. and then a farmer could say, well, I want to send my coffee to a GCC and see what they think the cup quality is, not my importer, not my exporter, but actually a nonpartisan professional that could taste the coffee. So we're starting to look at all this other, I guess I wasn't supposed to, that's a secret, I guess, but no, not really. but yeah, we were just starting to see a new part of ourselves because we had to do what we've done. And I've talked to so many people that are in the restaurant business and in the coffee business that have had to completely, change. And some of my friends in the food industry here in Portland have it's just insurmountable, and they can't find a way to modify, and they're just shedding restaurants or closing their business or changing completely what they're doing. So we could have gone that way. We could have been a group that just said, let's just hunker down and wait, and we'll get back to the producers next year. And so the end result is we have to just see if the economies that are out there can support the auctions, because that's the other part of the whole equation, is the actual auction performance and how well we're doing. And early indications with Ethiopia, we've had the most bidders sign up for the auction ever.
Wow.
We have almost close to 200.
And this is the first time it's happened in Ethiopia, right? COE?
Yeah, first year. Yeah.
That's
so
wonderful. What's the feeling like over there with regards to the excitement, even though it had to be modified? What's the feeling like with people on the ground, the producers?
Oh, just elated. We did a little webinar with I think the number 9 winner from Testy Coffee, and they had an anaerobic coffee. So we were talking to them about their process, and they're I have a lot of the producers are very active. Not all of them, but many of them are active on Facebook, and I've had people reaching out to me to friend and then just say thank you so much for this opportunity. And there was just a regional ceremony in, I think it was in the South, like Shakiso area, and so they did like a mini ceremony just for those winners in West RC, in that area, and there were quite a few winners from there. So they had like their own distance ceremony. I just saw that recently,
wow.
And we didn't even normally we would kind of help do that and put that together. They decided on their own, like we want to celebrate these producers that have won. So it's been overwhelming. How not the producers for sure, the Coffee and Tea Authority, who's our partner on the ground and is really the government entity that controls all coffee and tea exports and all the domestic roasting. That there's a lot of consumption in Ethiopia, and they've been delightful to work with, and all of the stakeholders involved, ECX and. Everybody's just rallied, and even more so because of what's happened with the pandemic. There've been even more support, and people. It's a happy distraction, I guess, right?
Right.
Considering what's going on. So,
well, people are trying to cultivate success, genuine success, and good feel stories wherever they can. So it's just, I think it's really important. I was pleasantly. I'm not going to say surprised. I wasn't surprised that you went ahead, but I was really happy that you found an alternative way to make it happen, because it signals the rest of the industry that this is just how it has to go. This is what happens when you stick by the values of the business, organization, co-op, non-profit, whatever it is that you're working for and leading in. When you actually are genuinely connected to the values that you're stipulating, you won't peace out when shit gets hard.
Yeah.
And I was, as an observer of your business, really happy to see that that's the direction that you went in, as opposed to saying, look, this is going to be really hard, but this is going to stress test us and stress test the people who say that they support COE, and let's see what we're made of.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And it's definitely been transformative in a lot of ways. And it's made me think about how you work under duress or under, really unfortunate situations, how you act, how you react, how you work with your staff. It's been interesting because I pretty much in the beginning just said, just don't come to the office, please.
Yeah.
Let's just stay home for a while and figure out what's going on. And then as we started to see different kind of iterations of work life, staggered percentages of people in the office, and then we just started assigning people. But the general feeling was that everybody wanted to come to work. They really didn't want to stay home for days and days. They really, not just because they wanted to get out of their home, but because there was something that was leading them into, finding a way to get all their stuff done and continue to work and work in a new way. But so that felt good because, a lot of people would actually rather shelter in place than go to their office and work any day of the week,
Correct.
Pandemic or not. So, I've got a great team. I'm really fortunate to have people that have, I've said it's like, oh, it's a miracle every day. We're just performing miracles practically. And it's almost like it becomes kind of rote at some point where you're like, okay, how we're going to conduct ourselves. And so, yeah, it's been good.
And shout out to Anna from your team.
Yeah.
I spoke to her the other day. What a lovely human. She's fantastic. She was so helpful when I called the other day to have a chat to you. Excuse me. And I should clarify why I called to talk to you. For anyone that's listening, we had an unusual circumstance with this episode of the podcast. I never call guests and say, hey, listen, I want to talk about this. The rules behind this podcast are that there are no rules. We start at a certain time, we go for about 2 hours, and then we talk about whatever we want to talk about or whatever eventuates in the discussion. There's no questions that are sent. There are no topics that are determined. There's nothing. It's a free-form conversation. This is not an interview. But I was out on a walk the other day thinking about how we can best use this moment to have a discussion, and to have someone like Darrin on the podcast is a real treat. And so how could we use Darrin's extensive experience and empathy in the industry to have a discussion about some hard shit? And so I called Darrin and said, hey, listen, I don't normally do this, but I would like to see how you'd feel about having a conversation about the power dynamics in coffee. And Darrin was like, yes, that is the conversation that needs to be had right now. And so I didn't want to blindside Darrin and say, hey, listen, let's talk about the power dynamics in coffee without giving him an opportunity to prepare. So that was why I called Darrin the other day. And that's a real big thing that we want to talk about today, right, Darrin?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's incredibly important, especially now, to be talking about what's going on and with everything that's happening economically. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
And the reason I thought it was so relevant is because over my career in coffee, which is nowhere near as long as yours, I've been in it about 20 years. You've been in it longer than that, right?
Yeah, a little over 30 years. So, yeah.
And so as my career evolved, I realized my ignorance for the first 15 years of my career in coffee, which has all been in specialty. I've never done anything except specialty. But my ignorance about the value chain for the first 15 years of my career, I had the luxury of being able to be ignorant because I was just focused on my own career. And I just assumed, well, it's not my job to give any fucks really about who the producers are. And damn was I wrong. And thanks to this podcast, I have made, and to having being the owner of Elixir Specialty Coffee, I care more about the value chain. I care extraordinarily intensely about the value chain because I now purchase coffee and we produce a product that's primary ingredient is coffee, and I have discussions about the value chain on the podcast. The thing is, when you start to dig into this subject and you look at like who are the actors in the industry that are addressing power dynamics at their core. You can't look past Cup of Excellence, because I feel like COE was, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was created to directly address an imbalance in power in the coffee value chain. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it stemmed out of a project that the ICO, the International Coffee Organization, had funded along with the ITC, the International Trade Commission, and it was called the Gourmet Project, and that was in 1997. So 2 years before COE started, George Howe and Susie Spindler, our founders, were tasked to work in a number of different countries and to examine why pricing was so low and how could we find a way to increase premiums. And basically George kind of came up with the competition cupping process, and Susie kind of came up with the auction platform. And the idea, really kind of blossomed in Brazil in 1999 with the first COE, and that was a way to explore, where is this coming from? Is it just bulk coffee from 300 producers that make one lot? Or how about let's look at one individual producer so we could recognize that individual's quality and we could trace it. So there's this traceability factor, there's a sustainability factor to it, and then there's basically rewarding quality with higher prices than what we would find with the C market. So it stemmed from the trying to analyze the disparity and where are the disconnects in the supply chain, and how could Cup of Excellence kind of fill in those gaps. And really the idea was, this should be a commercialized structure. And at the same time, the Q was starting their auction structure and system too, early in the 2000s, to examine quality so that you could grade it. And if you could grade it, then you could command or demand a higher price based on that quality. I think knowing George and Susie, like I know them, they're both very progressive in their approach to life and coffee. And I think that they saw that, and we were looking at Burundi, we were looking at Mexico, Brazil. I can't remember all of 5 of the countries, but I think the idea, especially when we looked at Burundi and Brazil, the largest and the smallest producers probably, by volume, and also one of the poorest countries in the world, Burundi, and one of the more wealthier countries in coffee, Brazil. And let's look at these countries and figure out a way to invigorate the supply chain from not from sitting here in the U.S., but actually going and running a competition and meeting producers and socializing the idea that we could provide a bridge. That was really the idea. So,
and 21 years later, how do you feel that progression has tracked? Do you feel like you guys are where you hoped you'd be in 21 years, or are we still behind on the progress that you had hoped we would make by then, do you think?
In my 3.5 years here, I feel like we're way behind on what we set out to do. And I think Susie, George, kind of moved on to his own thing, maybe three years after the program really got rolling. And when Susie started ACE, which was the umbrella organization in 2002, I think she really wanted to see a micro and a macro kind of structure. So the micro would be the COE and it's, rewarding nano lots and micro lots and recognizing these producers and then linking them to a bigger possibility. And that happened. We have, over $63 million of auction proceeds have been raised directly to producers over the 20 years. And, I wish it was 600 million.
Right.
But it also, we know that we've had some studies done and what that Technoserve put together in 2014 to look at Honduras and Brazil, and the after effect, the financial impact outside of the Cup of Excellence is far than that. And the white paper that was done on that really examines talking directly to those producers that were in COE and saying, okay, what impact happened to you after COE outside of the competition in terms of sales, premiums, volume, market access, new markets, and they all, directly from their own experience, detailed financially what kind of impact that they had. And I know personally just farmers that COE changed my life. COE got me into a completely different mindset as a grower. Stories of producers that were ready to sell the farm the year that they won, and they said, "Oh, now I don't have to sell my farm."
Wow.
Really, great success stories. And for all of that success, there's certainly producers that could probably say, well, it had a good impact, but I'm still struggling. I'm still going through. So we're not solving all of the problems that are out there, but we're solving some of the problems that are out there, but we're modeling a structure that I think we could take to a larger level, to a macro level, where it's more maybe lower quality by score, but a larger quantity of coffee that would be deserving of a premium for other things that they're doing. And we have other models like Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade, and they're trying to move the needle too in other ways. So, but the discussion is, it's very difficult to pay someone a lot of money for a quality that they can't actually sell at a price that would make it margin positive for companies. And that's where the big rub is how do you create models that aren't completely about quality. This has been this is the world that we're in and what we do. It's all about, and that's the justification for being able to kind of push the envelope on price, so.
Yeah, because in an industry that's so multi-billion-dollar focused, when we talk about $63 million, it's like, that's great. The organization has contributed that much money to these producers, but there's so big a pond that we need to make a dent in, that is $63 million. When you look at the big scape of where the power structures exist, it's not going to make as big a dent as it needs to be. And that's not to diminish what COE is doing. I'm sure you can see from the conversation so far, I'm a big fan. Not just because of the idea, but because of the execution and the follow through of what COE is doing. That has been demonstrated throughout, before the pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. You guys did not shit the bed. You continue through with what you're looking at doing, and I'm a big fan of the organization. And what I am wondering is, given that the model is proving to be beneficial, given that the model is proving to work, what is it that's in the way of it proliferating? Is it corruption? Is it legislation? Is it government? Is it multidimensional? What is preventing the proliferation of a program like this into the commercial market?
Yeah, well, in some ways it is happening in terms of an auction structure, or let the market make itself, instead of relying on the C market that isn't about. It's all about hedging and options trading and moving liquidity, and whereas what we're doing is just basically putting it out there and letting the market fight for it. And
right.
and the C market is doing that in a way. It's just a different model.
Yeah, but that's wizardry and fuckery. That's people who aren't a part of the actual value chain trying to make money off a commodity that it's not real. It doesn't exist yet. What I'm wondering is and I agree with you, that is kind of sort of happening as a byproduct of what's going on with the C market. But excuse me, why can't we deliberately take what you guys are doing and do that in the commercial market?
Well, and it's interesting. There was a gentleman that was running a company called Bean Auction out of the UK, and Tom, unfortunately, the business didn't make it, but he was trying to do just that, to commercialize coffee commercial coffees on an auction platform where it wouldn't necessarily be coming directly from an importer. It would be a market only kind of participation. There was no outside pressures, and unfortunately, and I worked very closely with him because we had coffees that were being disqualified in the process of COE, and I was trying to find homes for that coffee. So the off-listed coffees from Peru, for instance, or Burundi, I would go to Tom and say, Tom, let's put those on your platform and let's see if we can move them. And he did. He sold much of that coffee. He was involved with AFCA and doing their coffee competition and Taste of Harvest and it just, I think why it didn't work. What he was putting out was a floor price, just like any auction, and then people could bid for that coffee. Or they could buy it outright. It wasn't so much like a Helmsman auction, which is a timed auction, but it was just a platform like Cropster's Marketplace. Right. You just go and you find coffee. And in both these scenarios, I see the skeptical buyer going, well, I can go to an importer and get it cheaper. So that's one of the problems is that you have buyers that are set up to, they're competing against each other. And then they have to go to their CFO and their CEO and say, hey, I saved us, 10 cents on the pound for our total buys for the year because I bought futures, right? Mm-hmm. And, I've worked for small companies like Stumptown, which isn't so small anymore. Smaller companies in the beginning in the Northwest here in Portland, Eugene area, and then worked for a larger company like Allegro, where as we got bigger, up to 10, 12 million pounds, we had to kind of go into and were advised by the industry and other actors in the industry, like, hey, your best bet is to learn about, futures hedging, and start buying futures and hedging. And I was, leading that department in our fixations and we did save a lot of money. But see, to me, I think what that should do is if you can save money through futures and through fixations and doing that, then it's obligatory for you to go back and then pay premiums in other areas of your business. And instead, that didn't happen, and the quality, unfortunately, changed. And I think that's a scenario that you see with many companies that, they're like, well, the margins are getting tighter, and the competition is squeaking out $1 less here for a pod, for a capsule or whatever, and so now we have to buy the price. So it's either lower the quality or change the segment, go to a different segment, go to lower end, and it's the race to the bottom, and that's
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
So I hope you don't mind us exploring these ideas this way in this conversation. The thing that I keep seeing is that people have these great ideas and they want to start these things, and they want to be great actors in elevating and the value chain and breaking down the power structures. Cup of Excellence already has, or ACE has, the infrastructure already built to take on board creating another segment of what's happening. And it almost feels like if there was ever a time to do it, now's the time to do it, because people, if we see what people are predicting, that the price of specialty is going to go up because of perhaps a supply and demand dynamic that hasn't been anticipated previously, or because of a whole bunch of other reasons, people are going to be perhaps looking to be priced in a more like a 77, 78, coffees that just miss what their usual standards are. And perhaps a lot of coffees that would have ended up in the specialty category before had the producers had the workforce available to them, that is no longer available to them because of logistical constraints that are happening as a consequence of COVID. These really beautiful coffees are ending up in commercial lots. And I certainly know from my clients and people contacting us on the podcast saying, I have to find a way to increase the margins of what I'm doing. So I want to pay a fair price for lower scoring coffees, and this is perhaps the best time to do it. Can you help me figure out how I would go about doing that? And, you know, in preparing for this discussion, I kind of thought perhaps Cup of Excellence can help the massively growing number of people in that situation if it was to have a competition that kind of ran concurrent with what's going on now, but for a category of commercial coffee. Is that possible?
Well, it's something that we've been trying to potentially do. But what for us, like getting back to the original question that you said, was for us, it's not government intervention. It's not importers or exporters or even buyers that, are maybe less interested. It's funding. It's having someone who says, I want to finance you to actually grow this idea. And that's something that we're trying to do this year. Our organization's splitting into two different, a C6 and a C3, and that we'll get that determination here soon with IRS by the end of the year, we hope. And this would allow us to get larger funding on the Cup of Excellence side, so that we could actually have a different tier, the 80 to 86 category. Right now we're 87 and above, and that could also be more of a larger lots. And there are other examples of people that are doing it. Sensible Development is our auction provider, our platform provider, and they also have a division called Sensible Coffee, and they are doing larger auctions. Last year he did larger macro auctions, large lots, lower prices. He did I think 2 or 3 in Ethiopia. He's doing one now that I think is maybe Guatemala, but I'm not sure. And unfortunately, some of those auctions were somewhat successful. Some were not at all, and nobody bid. No bidders. And now I don't know if that's because of just trying something new and trying to figure out how to kind of make it work, or if it just takes time to get enough acknowledgement and get out there in front of people.
It's marketing.
I think it's marketing. Yeah.
You guys have the clout. You guys have put in 21 years of hard work that make you the trusted resource, which is why I'm like, this is more something that Cup of Excellence should be offering than anybody else, because you have the reputation and you've demonstrated a commitment to your values, even in the hardest of times. And so the trust is there in our community. And this is where you could really build on that trust. I mean, I'm not somebody who's trying to tell you what to do. Trust me, I'm somebody who, the moment I get a chance to support anything that you're doing, I want to, because as I said, you've demonstrated in times of difficulty and challenges, you're not buckling from your values. That's so fucking rare right now. That's so rare right now. And I just want to, I don't see a viable solution that's being presented for businesses. 8 out of the 10 businesses that I'm speaking to, Darrin, anticipate that they'll close forever by the end of this year.
Wow. God, that is
8 out of 10.
Yeah. That's just heartbreaking. I mean, because think of all those people that are employed that work in those structures, and we have a Portland famous chef here, Andy Richter, that owns Pok Pok, and he's got locations in New York and here in Portland. He just announced yesterday that he's closing all but his first Southeast Division store, and it was. I mean, the letter and what was sent out was so unbelievable, because you're like, how he can't fail? He's one of the best chefs in the country. It's impossible. How can he fail? And it's not failure. It's just recognition of reality. It's he didn't do anything wrong, and he's tried so hard. And he's someone I highly respect. And his letter, the thing he's like, what is the worst of all of this is not my personal gain, but what everyone is losing. That I love working with these are professional people that I love working with, and that's like, it's the end of a saga, a story. And it shouldn't have ended this way. And so, just this, you could feel how intense that is. And I'm sure you're experiencing that with people that, these people and their organizations. And And
And in my own business. Remember,
Mhm.
like I've got a company called Elixir Specialty Coffee that's got a wholesale business. These people close, I close.
Those, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's it, yeah.
It,
Yeah.
go ahead, please.
Oh, I guess, kind of for me, I feel incredibly fortunate that I'm even lucky enough to be existing with the program. Like I just feel very, very lucky that and not to say that we're out of we have some serious issues that we're facing, because if we we've had 3 countries that have canceled, and we predicted if we have 2 or 3 more, that we would really have to make some tough decisions on our staff and what 2021 would look like because of these situations. So every day we wake up, and if I get an email from a country, I'm like, oh God,
Right.
what's so and so have to say from Peru, or so we're on very thin ice, but we're holding firm. But I think that's, and I'm sure that's exactly what you're experiencing, is that the unknown. It's like the unknown, like, and at what point does it become, kind of like, oh, this is actually what's going to happen right now. So yeah, that unknown feeling is causing lots of lots of stress for lots of people. So,
And it is helpful that we're all experiencing this all at the same time. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I do feel a sense of less anxiety because I'm not the only person that's experiencing this. Do you feel the same?
Yeah. I do. I had a conversation with a friend who's in the coffee industry, and he said, he's like, man, we've all hit reset. Everybody's starting at the same place right now, and I was like, well, you're even though there are small companies and big companies and companies that are fortunate enough to be down the aisle in grocery stores who are actually seeing increased profits, more sales. But in a way, he's right. We all are starting in that like, where's the finish line? What is the finish line to the situation? Is there going to be one? That in that way, yeah, we are all going through it together. And I especially have been feeling that with the protests, because it is a global experience. And whatever you feel and your thoughts are about it, we're all going through it. And now these other countries are expressing their frustration and their history with race, and so there's that's also kind of we're all experiencing this together. And it's not just like, oh, I heard there's something going on in Ethiopia right now, or no, it's going on everywhere. We're all going. And it does. Yeah, and I guess you're reminded of it when you just go to the grocery store, or when you go out for a walk and you see how we're all strangers, friends, family. We're all having to. And the thing I have to remember is not everybody's dealing with it the same way, and to be sensitive to the fact that people are. It's a trigger for a lot of other situations and issues, and even dealing with people at work, and how like maybe saying something about even the fatalities, and that people might be like, I don't want to talk about that right now. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. That's an unfair thing to bring up certain things that might just be really sad. Maybe you had a family member that passed because of COVID, and I've lost not family, but I've lost many friends already this year, and people that I had that were teachers of mine, and
because of COVID,
people that were yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Darrin.
So it's we've where my university was in Boulder, one of the person that was a teacher there, and a very influential person was Hal Wilner. I don't know if he was the gentleman that did the music program at SNL for years for Saturday Night. Yeah, and he taught at Naropa, and we weren't like friends, but we knew each other, and and many of my friends were writing saying, this just happened. He lived in New York City and was far too young to to go. But so that kind of stuff, when you have that kind of reach out from people that you're like, wow, it's definitely you experience it differently than those that haven't maybe had that personal loss or a community person that you knew or an influencer that you knew. So
It
anyway,
brings up a big thing. I guess this is a good time to talk about this: empathy. It seems like, much like when people are talking about COVID from a governmental perspective, they don't seem to be talking about how to get healthy and keep yourself healthy. There's no discussion about, so these are the nutrients that you should be putting into your body to make sure that you are at optimum health, and make sure you get sleep, and make sure you get all of this kind of stuff. That seems to have been conveniently left out of the conversation because it doesn't really contribute to anybody's political agenda. Right now, I feel like the equivalent to that in the race discussion that's going on is empathy is being left out of the conversation. It seems to be that we aren't talking about how do we show up with empathy for what's going on right now to everybody. And that's not an all lives matter statement for anyone who's going to send me hate mail. Please don't. Like, if you have any questions about where I sit on this, go to my fucking social media. I'm not going to justify my position on this, or listen to the podcast. What I'm saying is, we got to find a way to have open discussion. We've got to find a way to listen to each other. We've got to find a way to have empathy for each other's perspectives without this cancel culture that seems to be going on right now, that I seem to be observing left, right, and center. It's like, no, fuck you. I don't like what you've got to say. I'm canceling you out, and there's going to be no road to redemption. We're seeing that happening with people. We're seeing it happening with companies. It doesn't matter what you've contributed in the past. It doesn't matter if you've added any value to the industry. Empathy's out the window. You say one thing that people aren't going to agree with, and it's like, no, fuck you, you're cancelled.
Yeah.
I don't know how that helps things.
Well, in the rush to judgment, I think we're more prone now, especially with social media, to block without maybe knowing what the facts are. We're just more prone to do that. It doesn't that it's not justifiable, and also judgment and empathy should work together, not against each other, right? And I think that's I mean, there, obviously we're talking around some things that we know are going on in our industry and other industries right now related to race. And if something's wrong and it's called out and it's wrong, and it should be dealt with, but it can't be erased. You can't erase people.
No,
you have to figure a way to.
Such a great point. Go ahead.
Oh, it's I think you brought up the word redemption or forgiveness or giving people a path towards awareness instead of denial of access, or denial of that you're just canceled. You now just basically disappear, and that's not going to end racism or sexism or economic inequality. And so so if we need to teach the haves how to share with the have-nots in a way that is not out of balance with capitalism, or so whatever your function is as a government, there's got to be ways I can't remember the title of the book that I think it's Compassionate Capitalism that John Mackey wrote, CEO Whole Foods. And the book has some really, it's a little bit self-serving, but it's also true that there can be an element of compassion, and that's all wrapped up in empathy.
Exactly.
Like if you feel sorry for someone that is disadvantaged and say, oh, well, I feel bad, but I'm not going to do anything about it. That's not empathetic. No. That's just using your knowledge to do nothing with it. Once you learn that there's something that's wrong, I think a lot of us feel like, okay, now we take action. Yeah. And you can't do that in a cancel environment where you're not giving anybody a leg up. You're just saying you're bad and you're bad forever, and we don't want you in our community, and we don't want you to learn from the mistakes that you have even admitted you've made. And that's what I can't quite understand, why we would not want to, it's not, I guess it's like some level of rehabilitation or, just raising it up, getting people to understand. Like, I think if you alienate people to that point, they're actually going to probably do worse.
Well, we saw that with with the situation with 4-Barrel, right? Like, the person who, in that situation, what you ended up was everybody got shamed, and the perpetrators just opened new businesses quietly.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes one of those situations of, now it's a more dangerous situation because, in my opinion, these are all my opinions, allegedly, all the legal terms that I need to use so that nobody sues me. But you end up in a situation whereby, if what we do is we shame people and we don't give people the opportunity to, for lack of a better phrase, find a road to redemption, they end up, and all the research says this, they end up crawling into a hole, virtue signaling and selecting for people who are going to work within their structure, and they just do it more quietly. And that's not going to fix anything.
No, you're just creating an underground,
a subculture,
channel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing, I used this analogy in a conversation the other day. What it feels like is going on right now is that you've got two sides of a discussion on either side of a riverbank, a really wide riverbank, and they're both shouting to each other. But what they're not realizing is that by the time that the sounds get to the middle of the river, it stops because the sound can't travel to the other side. The river's too wide. So nobody's hearing each other. Everybody's doing a fuck ton of shouting and nobody's listening, nor is the actual signal being received. And what we need to do is we need to close the gap of what the river is. And I think that's where empathy comes in. Where, it's one of those things whereby, hey, listen, like, do we really need to cancel this person? Do we really need to say, no, fuck you, everything you've ever done is a piece of shit, you're a piece of shit human, and we don't want you in our community anymore? What does that achieve? Especially in a community that is touting, we're all about community. Yeah,
it's totally disheartening, and it kind of, I understand the rage and the anger, especially around, I totally, and I'm there. I'm sick of us having to divide by country and by race. I mean, we should celebrate our differences and our cultures, and I'm totally all about that completely. But it is a human experience and an experiment that we're going through, and I think we lose sight of that because we've kind of been seduced by our own. I'm not trying to blame governments, but I do think that that's kind of part of it, is that we kind of fall into the channels that we're in, and we're letting them control us more than we should be controlling the human experiment itself. And it doesn't mean that it's just total anarchy and everything goes, but you have to have some structure, but not when it comes to judgment of people. No. And there's got to be other ways of not canceling, but recreating and trying to. I don't know. It's a conversation that I've been having in my head a lot lately, and that's why when you brought up the issue of wanting to talk about this, I was like, I really have been thinking a lot about it, and we're glued into an international network of people constantly. We're talking to people all over the world all the time, and I feel really very blessed that I can be in touch with the world network of people and find out what people's impressions are, and generally right now people are writing me from other countries and saying, what is going on
I'm getting
with
the
your
same
country?
Thing.
Yeah.
I hope you're staying okay amongst the chaos. I'm getting that again and again. Are you okay? Do we need to bring you home?
I don't know. I mean, I'd love to leave right now, no doubt. I'd be so happy in Ethiopia right now. I was supposed to be there, like actually probably starting Monday. I was
Yeah.
supposed to fly there and do a big, kind of like post competition auction kind of,
Celebration.
event. Yeah, and I even this morning I was like, well, maybe in a month we could figure it out and I'll go. And I'm still like trying every way I can to get out of here for a little while, just to get, I'm so used to traveling and getting different perspectives, and how, like looking at it from another angle and just reading the local newspaper and seeing what people are looking at their world news. And so I kind of miss that. But there are other ways to get that kind of education and knowledge. But yeah, it's nothing like traveling. But yeah, and there's even issues with that. That's another issue that comes up is, coffee buyers, or not that I'm a coffee buyer anymore, but why are you traveling? And when carbon footprint, and maybe you don't have the best of intentions when you are traveling to use whatever you're using in your marketing. And that discussion has been a very heady one that I think that's almost like a cancel on coffee buyers. Like, you should be able to buy coffee from your living room and not have to travel to these origins. And so I don't support that argument at all. I think that, community is built and businesses are built, by being as close as you can to where you're sourcing products, if you are fortunate enough to be able to do that, but yeah, I mean, these are, issues that are going to shape the industry over the next few years, and how we react as a community, as an industry, or not. We won't act as a community, won't be communal together in some of the stuff that's being put out there right now. So
what my big concern is that, to use your idea that, and which I agree with, that we're operating within a construct that has been defined for us by power structures. Those power structures being government and legislation and whatnot. And we have, so if we use my river analogy, the government made that river as wide as it needed to be. And we've chosen, okay, so there's a river and we need to stand on one side or the other of the river. Because if I get in the river, I'm going to get wet. And I've been conditioned that that's not something that I should do. And there's danger inside that river. There could be piranhas in there. There could be, eels. There could be a whole bunch of things that would hurt me. And from where I'm standing, I have no idea. So the safest place for me is on one side or the other. And we're not looking at that construct because it was created 400 years ago. Or it was created however long ago. And that's a no longer relevant fact because it's been programmed into our consciousness as a community. And what we're doing as we're yelling at each side from the opposite side of the river, hopefully what will happen is that we will have people, and I'm hoping that this podcast is one of those things, that people just turning around and saying, I don't know if they're going to be piranhas, but I'm going to figure out how I can hear what the other side is saying. And if I'm too scared to step inside the river, why don't I go find people who can help me build a bridge? Why don't I see if there's a way that we can get a boat onto this river that can bring enough people together that want to have a conversation from either side, rather than just staying on our separate sides and, without realizing it, participating in a construct that was built 400 years ago to prevent us from actually realizing that we are still operating within a construct that isn't fixing anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We're being bound by, old institutions that are maybe just can't function anymore. I mean, obviously the debates around defunding the police, changing the culture of community action and community support. And like, these are huge institutional conversations that are going on that should have been going on a long time ago. And when we look at some of the other movements that have popped up, in terms of, I don't know if it's the 1%, some of that, the economic disparity, and how what the top 20, I think the top 5% of our wealth, basically, yeah, I was looking at some stat like that top 5% is like owns over 22% of the nation's wealth, like, and that's, these are big conversations about disparity. And when we look at race, especially, and you look at the disparity in income, it hasn't changed.
No.
It hasn't changed. And like, even from 1970 to now, it hasn't changed at all. It's actually widened, and it's widening. And I think as that pressure is being put on across this country, at least, people are sick of it, and they're sick of the injustice. And it's then the first thing you start to look at is like, well, what's the structure that's creating this disparity? And then now we're actually really looking at it. And so, that's it. It's healthy, it's good, but it's at the cost of people's lives, unfortunately. And that's what's just untenable. It has to stop. And so, but it's raising all of these issues that need to be addressed. And again, we're all experiencing that. we all have opinions, and we all have ideas on how it should change, and what should be and shouldn't be. And that's why, a true justice system hears all sides, both sides, and makes a decision that's equitable. And we need that on so many levels right now, economically, culturally. So it's a big thing to tackle, but it's playing out right now. And and even through the pandemic itself, it's playing out, and how, who's getting sick, who are the people that are who's getting sicker than other people. And there's an economic reality around that. There's the cultural, social reality around that too. And so if people aren't thinking about all this stuff now, I don't know what will wake them up.
And that's the big concern, right? And this is where I'm more concerned than ever, is that we're going to miss the boat on deep diving into the nuance of this discussion. Because if we don't swim in the grey right now, we're not actually going to achieve dismantling the chokehold that the system has on people's consciousness.
Yeah.
If we just cancel people out and they're like, well, fuck you, I'm gone. If we just eradicate things without looking at the nuance and looking at how other systems are built on top of, for example, defunding the police. I don't understand enough about it and I understand a lot about it, but still not enough to have an intelligent enough perspective to predict where I think it will go. And a part of where we've got to look is like, it's great for you to have a blanket opinion because you're going to virtue signal one side or the other. Defund the police, don't defund the police. I want to tell everyone I'm on the left, or I want to tell everyone I'm on the right. But what do you actually mean by defunding the police? What are the long-term consequences of doing that? And what are some of the short-term implementable actions that we can take that immediately look at the very big low-hanging fruit that we can attack that are real problems? And a lot of that is playing out, like Briannon's law, things like that changes can be affected immediately through legislation that start to really send big time signals to the police of like, hey, listen, your chokehold on society, that time is coming to an end, and we're going to ensure that happens. Defunding the police, if we don't all understand what we mean by that, are we going to end up in a place as a society where if we don't take a beat and start looking at what the reality of what we actually want to create is, are we just trying to find a solution right now that makes us feel better with the tsunami of emotions that are hitting us all at once from 400 years of repressed trauma that needs to be expressed.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we activate really quickly, but I think we need to do it smart. And I think, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think a holistic, like not a reactionary kind of process, but a holistic process to make decisions. But, obviously we're making decisions in a really, or at least like even the legislation that was just signed today is, this is an action that has been sitting on lots of people's desks. And then they finally react because, oh my God, this terrible thing has happened. We better do something about it. That's the whole problem. Where it's not, it's like, it's not, it's allopathic instead of naturopathic, or we're not treating it before it happens. We're not getting ahead of it. And yeah, so then we overcompensate and we just keep moving across away from the actual answer and just kind of, it's a band-aid. I mean, this is not a band-aid. The thing that is being done today, I think I was actually, as much as I like to follow current affairs and politics, which I do, I just assumed that was already in some states.
Which law
already
are you
a
referring
no-go. Oh, the choking.
The one
ban.
that's in New York, right? No chokehold?
Well, I mean, the president just signed it as a national law.
Oh.
So all states will now have to. Now, certain states may have already had chokehold, was prohibited. I just assumed it was because, the gentleman here in Portland many years ago that was killed by a policeman, and he was a restaurant owner here in town, and they performed a chokehold on him, and he died in a cell. And it was a huge issue in Portland, and a lot of things changed. So I assumed that this was going on in many other states, that this would be obviously a ban. So for me to find out today, oh, now we're finally signing this thing, that just common sense. When you do that to someone, there's a chance they may not wake up. I mean, that it's it's not. It's a defensive move that can be lethal, as we know. And so and going back to Garner, and this has been going on, like what? It just doesn't make any sense. It's just.
It doesn't. I mean, when you learn about things like slavery is unlawful, except if you've committed a crime and are in jail, then we can treat you like a slave. That's a law in this country. And so, I don't know, do you know the story about how rap proliferated in the music industry and why?
No, I mean, not really. I mean, no.
I used to be in the music industry for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I had my own record label and whatnot, and I had my own music entrepreneur show podcast. And I used to have, every week there was a different panel discussion, and most of the time it was people who were Grammy Award winning, ARIA Award winning people who were making decisions in boardrooms and stuff. Mm-hmm. And on the podcast, one of my friends, Jason Schweitzer, he told me this story, and I went and looked it up, and every now and then the article pops back on the internet because people take it down. They have it, lawsuits are put against people who tell this story. Because what happened was the proliferation of rap music was funded by private prisons. What they found was that as rap music, particularly gangster rap music, was proliferating in a community, the crime rate would go up. And if the crime rate went up, more people would get incarcerated. Once the public jails filled up, there became a need for more jails. So the private prison system went to the record labels and had a secret meeting and said to them, we will fund gangster rap record labels. We will bankroll them. Because it directly benefited the construction of the private prison industry.
Wow. I've never heard that before. Yeah.
Every now and then the article pops up by people who were in the room at that meeting. And when you read the account, you're like, holy shit. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's well known within the music industry. It's well known that this was constructed within those of us who were a part of or still are a part of the music industry. And when you look at that, that's when you start to realize there was a systemic, intentional contribution made by actors within the wealthy community to line their pockets through the manufacturing of an environment that would work specifically against the black community.
And those labels should be required to pay back to the communities they've destroyed.
Exactly. And this is where it's infuriating, right? Like if we're not, if all we're saying is like, let's just defund the police, and we're not digging into the connections, like there's it's a net, it's a web of wizardry and fuckery that props this whole bullshit up. We have to dismantle a lot of it. And if we dismantle the wrong thing, that's going to give the people who built the river, it's going to give them the ammunition to say, well, see, you defunded the police and now we've got anarchy. So...
Yeah.
And we don't want that, right?
Right. Yeah, it's almost like a setup for... And yeah, I think to me, it's, when we have different unions and associations that are lobbying openly, and we don't have any laws to protect our own citizens because these lobbyists are able to channel funds to, the police unions and then meanwhile we have the nurses union who can't get a certain amount of funding, can't get the proper equipment to treat people in a hospital who are sick with COVID. But then we have an officer who's literally in a military garb and fully protected from everything to go out and, crack heads
and run over protesters.
Yeah. What the hell what are we telling my kids? Like, I can't, I've been talking with my kids about what's going on, and it's really, my oldest is out protesting basically in Denver, and they're very, very active. Yeah. Very, very active. And getting his perspective has been like, he's like, we're going to change this world, I'm like so proud, like, wow, you are not someone. He's very, very active and politically aware, but this has like ignited him to be in solidarity with the protesters and be out there. And he's a painter. He's been painting.
I saw that painting of George Floyd. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's doing other portrait work, and then giving some of the proceeds to basically Black Lives Matter, the organization there, and I think NAACP, and so I'm just like, go for it, and that's what I think the younger generation is really
inspiring.
This is their moment. This is their moment, and you can see it. You can see it in. But there are people of all backgrounds and ages going to these events here in Portland for sure, and ones that have been in my neighborhood. Actually, I live really close to the interstate that we just shut down. I was actually not in town during it. I was in Colorado, but I was like, oh my God, there's my apartment. It's like real right on television, and like it's a very large protest, and every night, and as well as in Denver where my oldest is, but they're the ones that are not being given a very great situation, but they're call to arms. They're very serious and very organized, and for the most part incredibly peaceful. And I even wonder about that, like what's behind some of the things that we think are going on
The bricks.
instigating. Yes, and
There's that wizardry and fuckery again.
it's the same. Yeah, it's either in a boardroom or it's being played out in these kinds of, kind of deviant. That has been, that has always been an issue with movements, is that there's going to be those that want to try to manipulate it to get the outcome they want, which is for things not to change at all. So,
which is why I'm such a big advocate of, like, let's not cancel each other out.
mm-hmm.
Let's make this one of those situations where if we are looking to stimulate conversation, if we're looking to hear each other, that's where we deconstruct the programming.
Mm-hmm.
Because then if we're engaged in those conversations, it doesn't matter how many piles of bricks, whether they be physical piles of bricks or virtual piles of bricks, are put around us. We're not paying attention to them. We're not looking to hurt each other. We're looking to discuss and take action based on dismantling a system that exists within us,
Mm-hmm.
as well as around us. Because the shit that I'm seeing going on in our community isn't making... On one part, I'm really proud of some of the stuff that's going on in our community. On the other side, I'm fucking terrified of what's going on in our community, because the long-term viability doesn't seem to be something that's going to give a return on investment that's going to elevate the industry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it scares the shit out of me. Not because I'm physically terrified of, like, I don't mean that kind of scared the shit out of. I mean the kind of scared the shit out of the people who are doing the cancelling, the people who are putting the bricks there. They're both like equal extremes of the same kind of behavior. And if we pay too much attention to allowing that to continue to happen, we're missing all the kind of the information and the places where we can affect real change. Because it's a distraction, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how, but we've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes. I don't know how the shit that happened. Which is just an indication of the fact that this is a great conversation. But I do want to ask one more question before we do go. Where do you think the power sits in the coffee value chain?
Well,
it's a big question. I get it.
Yeah. I think the market itself does possess a lot of the power, and as an instrument, right? It really, literally the C market is a powerful entity that we all kind of believe in and feed into.
It's another river.
But it is, right? But I think if you look at the actors that are involved, it's the institutions that have probably, if you're really going to break it down by, like, is it the farmer? Is it the exporter? Is it the importer? Is it the roaster? Is it the consumer? Who's really winning the most? And we know for sure the farmers are getting, so we know who's not winning. But I think when we look at the other segments, they're all kind of glued together in a way. So they're all complicitly involved, and whether they, knowingly or unknowingly, are part of this bigger machine, and can't quite disengage, because their 1 or 2 or 3% margin that they make would erode in minutes if they did change the model. So they're just as stuck as the producers are, but the scale of wealth seems to that's where the scale itself is not properly segmented. Obviously, it's not. So the power really does reside in the multinationals that are out there, that the larger companies that have gained a lot of profit over the years, and many of them redistribute back. Some of them have foundations and they have funds, but when you look at the overall give for most of these institutions, it's a very small percentage of their overall profit. So, I think if you had to say where the money resides, it resides in the groups and organizations that are postured on the export and import side. And then lately, as I've been looking at it, and I know a lot of folks that, are very open about how they share their information from the import export side, and they do run on pretty razor thin margins, but they trade a lot of volume.
Mm-hmm.
So that volume has to happen for them to be able to actually keep people employed and keep things going. But if you look at the last 30 to 40 years of specialty coffee's growth, the great wealth has been concentrated with the roasters.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
I know I'm probably pissing off we're a member-based organization
Yep.
of roasters, and they I think many of them would say we have done very well.
Mm.
We have done very, very well. We have grown, but we also realize that we need to change something. And when we have the organizations like in Veritas, which is a nonprofit organization that goes out and coffee companies will hire them to come out and survey their supply chain and give them a very honest, very, very candid feedback on what they're doing and not doing to invigorate that supply chain. So the fact that companies are asking and employing these types of organizations, not to certify something, it's not a certification, it's an audit, and you can do what you want with that audit, but now that this is here's your grade. You could be proficient, and right now you're not proficient in your supply chain. And so I think more companies are starting to realize that they need to audit. They need to look, because they are going to be canceled.
Mm.
Their consumers are going to cancel them, and they will do it right away if they know that there's something inequitable or unfair when they say they're doing all these great things. So I think this is the big turning point for a lot of companies, and I think the roasters are. I think that they need to. I think it's almost a requirement for them to kind of look at their source supply and understand where things are going on and reporting out on what that is. We always just say, basically, why can't people just pay more for coffee? And it's not as simple as we'd like to think. But there is if an industry that says it is part of a community recognizes that their number one product that keeps them alive might just go away tomorrow, would they all get together and rally to say, hey, we got to take care of each other, because we're all going to lose if we don't have any more coffee producers. And that's really where we're at. It's that much of a crisis that I think these companies need to socialize this idea that if we all agree that we're going to have to pay more for an equitable supply chain, then we're all going to have to charge more. And then we all are at a level where we're still competitive. But then we have to go to those consumers and explain to them that we've been selling you unethical coffee for the last 50 years, and we are now taking a stand against it.
But now you're asking people to unveil their wizardry and fuckery.
And that's where the fear is, right? That the fear that we can't go back now, because this is that road to recovery, right? Like if we were, or that road to, kind of
building a bridge.
Say we made a big mistake, and we're going to own up to it now, and we're going to make the following changes in our supply chain efforts, and we're going to, it's going to inevitably it's going to happen,
right? But here's the problem with that: if we have a cancel culture. If we exist within a cancel culture, people are going to be less likely to step into the vulnerability of having to make that step publicly because of what they could receive on. And this is why I'm so big on wait, let's stop. Because if we want people to cop to some of the things that they've done in the past that they could change, this cancel culture is signaling to everybody right now, shut the fuck up and don't admit what you did wrong. Because they're coming for you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So everyone is you're being held hostage by your own design,
Yeah.
and there's no respite. There's no process for healing or change because we're hemmed into this dynamic.
It's fear.
And yeah, and there are it's fear, and there are companies that are doing it. They're out there, and they're really not just saying that they're equitably trading coffee. They're actually really doing it, but they're few and far between. And the bigger ones that have done really well, and even the medium ones that have done really well, I think are aware that they need to do something, but they may not have, like, you might be the most influential coffee buyer within a company, but you still have a structure above you, and you have stakeholders, and you have other people that are like, they don't care.
No.
They don't. In fact, they actually really care that you do not change, because just keep the money rolling in. And this is the greed component of all of this. And that, change is too painful. So let's just keep it the way it is. But again, I keep going back to the fact that if producers just stop, because it's just it's just such a poverty moment for them for the rest of their life and the next generation, then, if people would just assume that one day there will not be coffee, whether it's because of the climate or our inability to nurture our own structure, our own house, and keep it in order, then you'll lose it. You'll lose it. Just like, the pandemic has showed us that, our health is really fragile, and that some little thing like this could come in and be a really big thing in 4 months. That we all thought wasn't going to be a big deal. We were looking the other way, and now we're like, oh, you need to do something about this. You need to take measures. And I see that's the same thing in the coffee industry. We were having a coffee crisis before the pandemic crisis, and it exploded a lot of conversations within the supply chain with people that I work with and that we work with, and to me, it's the same thing. Like, we're pretending that we don't have this sickness. And we're just getting sicker and sicker. And at some point we'll have a coffee pandemic. And this has been a little bit of it should be a wake up call for us to call to action. And I've been having these conversations with people for years, and we're like, yep, all right, well, talk to you later. We have these huge, but nothing ever, the price crisis, model that SCA has been working on. I was reading the preamble and a lot of really great ideas, but none of them are being put into effect. And we know what's wrong, but we understand
what's going on.
Yeah. So it's a really volatile situation, and I see that in the next, even if the C market corrects itself, the damage has been done for the last 40 years, and we're just not going to. It's not going to just, prices are high and everything's great now. It's such a slow, another race to the bottom, in terms of where we're going. So, but yeah, I don't know.
I could talk to you for another 3 hours on all of this stuff. It's always a delight to have a conversation with you, Darrin. Thanks for everything that you guys are doing. I'm a big fan of the work that Cup of Excellence is doing. And however we can help in the future, I have some ideas that I'm going to email you about with regards to Veritas. Okay. Thanks for the generous way that you contributed to this conversation. It was a pleasure.
Oh, yeah, I love chatting with you. It's always great. And it's always lovely. So, you have a great rest of the day. Okay.
You too. Stay safe. Good luck with everything, especially good luck with the first Cup of Excellence auction that's happening in Ethiopia on June 25th. Mm-hmm. And can people still register to be a part of that auction?
Yeah, you can still register. The samples are completely sold out, but they're
That's
still
awesome.
You can still register for the auction. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So on our website. Yep. Great.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your day, Darrin. Take care.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Peace, love, and peanut butter.